you feel about cutter quilts? I'm Michelle. This is my romantic tangle, and I have got a bee in my bonnet today. I have spent the past 48 hours trying to decide whether or not to make this video, but I'm going to get it off my chest because I have seen a number of statements lately that just have me fuming. Cutter quilts, upcycling quilts, people who take quilts that are antique or vintage and then make them into clothing to resell. You can do what you want with a quilt that belongs to you, but it makes me sad some of the arguments that I have seen justifying these. No one was using it. That is the biggest one. And if you take a quilt that is almost 100 years old, I am specifically talking about my great grandma and great great grandma's quilts. No one has been using those quilts for probably 30 years now. But they are still quilts. They will be used in the future. As soon as you cut them up and make something out of them, they're not quilts anymore, and you have shortened their lifespan. You have made them into something that will only appeal to a certain person. If it's clothing, it's a person of a certain size. Why would you do that? Now, if it is a very damaged quilt or a mass-produced quilt, there are a lot of quilts that were produced to sell in department stores that are in the style of vintage and antique quilts that are hand-stitched, and I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about great grandma's quilt. I saw a couple of videos when I was researching for this one, and a woman was going to make herself a coat. She was holding up what she called the most beautiful quilt she had ever seen. There was nothing wrong with it. The fact that she had run down to the thrift store and bought that and was going to make it into something consumable just makes me sad. If you have quilts that no one is currently using, that have a family history, or that are antique or vintage and beautiful, please think twice before you send them down a dead-end road of becoming something that isn't a quilt anymore. There is a closet full of antique quilts at my mom's house. They are quilts my great-grandma and my great-great-grandma made. I slept under the double wedding ring quilts when I was in high school. I'm probably the last person who used them, and as I think back on it, I hope I didn't add to the wear and tear on them. I don't think I did anything terrible to them. And if I hadn't used them, I wouldn't know now that they were there, so I wouldn't have had the sense of attachment to them. There's a basket quilt I think my parents used on their bed when I was little. Someday these will come and live at my house, and I am hoping I will have room to display them on a bed. They're too fragile to be used for sleeping under every night. But they are quilts that the fact that nobody used them for a few decades doesn't strip them of their value. It doesn't mean that drastic measures should be taken. This quilt behind me is here because it is the oldest quilt I have in my house. It is not a family piece. Okay, to be fair, it's not a quilt, it's a top. A friend of a friend gave it to me probably 15 years ago because she didn't know what to do with it and she thought I might finish it into a quilt. I fully intend to do that. Life happened. I'll be honest, I'm afraid of not doing it justice because it is gorgeous. I think it is feed sack. Whoever owned the house that this quilt came from, it was diverted from the landfill by a friend of a friend's husband, and she passed it on to me, and I'm its temporary custodian. I will probably be its custodian. I have no plans on getting rid of it or passing it down or selling it or anything. I feel an obligation to take care of this because it's an old quilt. It's not my place to rip it up and make something else out of it. I'm working hard to convince myself that it is my place to quilt it and make it a functional quilt. There is a bedspread in my mother's closet. Great grandma made it, I think when Mom was first married. It is crocheted with crochet thread. It is a counterpane. If I had a picture, I would show you. It is just glorious. I didn't know until 10 years ago that it even existed because it's too nice to use. But it has been sitting carefully taken care of. We're a little bad, I think, about putting away things that are too nice to use, and I want to fix that at some point. But I am so glad that my mother didn't get rid of it just so someone else could use it, just so it would be better if somebody else used it. Sometimes it's okay to have things put away for safekeeping. Sometimes it's okay to let things go unused for a while, if especially when they're family heirlooms with a history. Mary Fons did a video about the practice of cutting up vintage and antique quilts to make into clothing. I'm going to link to it in the description. She is an expert in the quilting field, explains the issues so much better than I ever could. There's some strong language in it, but she has strong feelings on the subject, and I do not blame her one bit. Another thing that makes me testy is when the people who are upcycling these quilts make up things about, well, the woman who made this quilt would be smiling down on me from heaven because look what I have done to elevate it. You have no way of knowing how she would have felt about that. If you take something that was unique and turn it into something on your own, I feel like it's disrespectful. Maybe that's just me. Thanks for watching. I'm Michelle. This is my romantic tangle. Let me know how you feel about cutter quilts and all of this. I'm really curious to hear.